The arena floor was slick with blood. Not human blood, but close enough. Princess Ziria pressed her small clawed hands against the observation window, her royal guards flanking her in perfect stillness. Below, in the circular pit carved from volcanic stone, a human stood alone. No armor, no weapon. Just pale skin stretched over lean muscle, breathing steady while the Krathian war beast circled. "Mother," Ziria whispered, but Queen Valora raised one elegant finger. Silence. The beast was dying already, anyone could see that. Its flanks heaved, purple ichor dripping from wounds along its neck where the human had somehow gotten inside its guard. The creature stood twice a human's height, built like the predators that had ruled Ziria's homeworld before her ancestors learned to speak. Claws like curved daggers, teeth that could shear through battle steel. The human watched it. Just watched, hands open at his sides. "He has no weapon," one of the guards murmured. Cassith, the youngest. Queen Valora's head turned fractionally. Cassith fell silent. The beast lunged. 400 pounds of engineered killing force moving faster than anything that size should move. The human didn't run. He stepped forward, inside the arc of those claws, and his shoulder drove into the creature's chest just below the throat. The impact sounded like a hammer striking meat. The beast's momentum carried it over the human's back, and somehow, Ziria couldn't see exactly how, the human's arm wrapped around its neck as they fell together. They hit the arena floor in a tangle. Dust rose. The crowd in the stands roared, thousands of voices from a dozen species all betting on death. The human's legs wrapped around the beast's torso. His arm tightened. "He's going to die," Cassith said. The human's face was pressed against the creature's neck, hidden behind its bulk. The beast thrashed, claws raking backward, and one caught the human's thigh. Blood, human blood, sprayed across white stone. The human didn't scream. His arm kept tightening. The beast's movements grew erratic. Desperate. Its tail whipped against the arena wall hard enough to crack stone. The human held on. Ziria could see the muscles in his arm trembling, see the way his whole body strained, but his grip never loosened. "Mother?" Ziria said again, quieter this time. The beast's struggles weakened. Its claws still raked backward, but slower now, weaker. The human shifted his weight, and his other arm came up to reinforce the first. His face was visible now over the creature's shoulder, and there was no rage in it. No hatred. Just concentration. Just necessity. The human held the position for 3 more seconds, then 5. Then he released his grip and rolled away, coming to his feet in one smooth motion despite the blood running down his leg. He didn't raise his arms in victory. Didn't acknowledge the crowd. He just looked up at the observation window where Ziria and her mother stood. His eyes found Ziria's. Held them. "Why isn't he celebrating?" Ziria asked. Queen Valora's voice was soft, meant only for her daughter. "Because he understands what he just did." The arena master's voice boomed across the space, announcing the human's victory in the galactic standard tongue. Credits changed hands in the stands. The human still stood there, breathing hard, blood dripping from his thigh to mix with the beast's ichor. "He killed it without a weapon," Ziria said. "How did he kill it without a weapon?" "Watch," her mother said. Attendants entered the arena to drag away the corpse. The human didn't move as they approached. He stood perfectly still while one of them, a Vothrine medic, approached with a medical kit. The medic gestured at his leg. The human shook his head and pointed at the arena exit. The medic insisted. The human turned and walked toward the exit anyway, limping but upright. "He refused treatment," Cases said. "Why would he refuse treatment?" Queen Valora didn't answer. She watched the human disappear through the arena door, then turned away from the window. "We're leaving, but there are 7 more matches scheduled. Now." The guards formed up instantly, but Ziria didn't move. She kept her hands pressed against the window, looking down at the empty arena floor, at the blood drying on white stone, at the broken body of something that should have been unstoppable. "Ziria." Her mother's voice allowed no argument. Ziria turned from the window, but she was trembling. He could have died. Yes. He chose to fight anyway. Yes. Why? Queen Valora looked at her daughter, and something moved behind her eyes. Something Ziria had never seen before. "We'll discuss this in private." They moved through the observation tower in formation, guards creating a protective diamond around the royal family. The crowds parted without being asked. The noise of the arena faded behind them, replaced by the quiet murmur of the tower's upper levels where only the wealthy gathered. Ziria's mind kept replaying what she'd seen, the way the human had stepped into the beast's charge instead of away. The way he'd held on while being torn open. The stillness in his face when it was over. "Mother," she said, as they reached their private chamber, "I want to speak with him." Queen Valora stopped walking. "Please," Ziria added. Her mother stood in silence for a long moment, then, "Kasith, find the human. Bring him to the diplomatic suite. Tell him the Queen requests an audience." "Your Majesty, protocol." Dismissed. Kaseth left. The other guards remained, but they'd moved to the chamber's perimeter, giving the illusion of privacy. Ziria sat in the chair her mother indicated, her small frame almost swallowed by its size. "You knew I'd ask. I know you, daughter." "Will he come?" Ziria counted her heartbeats, tried to imagine what words she would use, what questions she would ask, but every thought led back to the same image. The human's arm wrapped around the beast's neck, holding on while dying, refusing to let go. The door opened. Kaseth entered first, then stepped aside. The human walked into the chamber. He'd cleaned the blood from his leg, but hadn't bandaged it properly. The wound was still visible through torn fabric, still weeping. His eyes swept the room, noting the guards, the exits, the window, before settling on Queen Valora. He didn't bow. "You requested me," he said. His voice was quiet. Rough from whatever he'd been breathing in that arena. "My daughter has questions," Queen Valora replied. The human's gaze shifted to Ziria, and she felt something catch in her chest. Up close, she could see the scars. Could see the way he held himself, weight balanced, ready. "How did you win?" Ziria asked. The human was quiet for a moment. Then, "I didn't let go. No armor." "It should have killed you." "It tried to." Ziria stood from her chair, moving closer despite Kaseth's hand twitching toward his sidearm. The human didn't move, but something changed in his stance. A subtle shift. "Why did you fight?" Ziria asked. She was close enough now to see that his hands were shaking slightly. "You could have refused. You could have chosen the arena with weapons. Why did you fight that way?" The human looked past her to Queen Valora. Some unspoken communication passed between them. Then he looked back down at Ziria and said, "Because someone needed to see it." The arena stretched 12 stories below the diplomatic district, carved into bedrock that had stood for 3,000 years. Human Marcus Chen walked beside Kaseth through corridors where the stone still smelled of blood. His leg ached where the war beast had opened it, but he'd learned long ago not to show weakness in places like this. The Galactic Coalition ran on displays of strength, and any hesitation could be mistaken for submission. They passed other fighters in the halls, a Vothrene with cybernetic arms, 2 Creathians arguing in their clicking tongue, a human woman with scars across her face who nodded at Marcus as he passed. She knew. They all knew. When you fought in the arena without weapons, you were either desperate or making a point. Marcus was making a point. "The Queen doesn't usually grant audiences to arena fighters," Kaseth said. His hand stayed near his sidearm, but his tone was almost conversational. "I'm not just an arena fighter. No. You're the human ambassador's security consultant, which makes this even stranger." Marcus said nothing. Let the silence work. Kaseth stopped at a door carved with symbols Marcus recognized. Royal house markings, meant to intimidate. "You didn't bow when you entered. You should know that's considered an insult." "I know." "Then why?" "Because I wasn't summoned as a subject. I was summoned as someone who did something worth seeing." Kaseth's eyes narrowed, but he opened the door without another word. The chamber beyond was designed to make visitors feel small. High ceilings, narrow windows, furniture that forced you to look up at whoever sat in power. Queen Valora occupied a seat that could have been called a throne without exaggeration. The princess stood beside it, still small enough that her head barely reached her mother's shoulder. But it was the princess who held Marcus's attention. She was trembling. Not from fear. He'd seen enough fear to know the difference. From something else, something rawer. "You said someone needed to see it," the princess said, continuing a conversation Marcus barely remembered starting. "See what?" "Permission to speak freely?" "Granted." He turned back to the princess. "Your empire spans 200 worlds. You have technology that can crack planets, ships that move faster than light, weapons that make atomic bombs look like firecrackers. But you've forgotten something. Or maybe you never knew it. What have we forgotten?" The princess moved closer, and this time none of the guards stopped her. "What it costs to survive with nothing but yourself." The queen's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture. She was listening. Really listening. Marcus gestured at his leg. at the wound that had started bleeding again. That thing in the arena was designed to kill. Claws, teeth, speed, strength, every physical advantage. I'm softer than it is, slower than it is, weaker by every measure that matters in a straight fight. But I won. How? The princess was close enough now that Marcus could see the way her breathing had changed. 'Cause I understood something it didn't, something most species in this coalition have forgotten because they've had technology do their fighting for so long. Tell me. Marcus crouched down, bringing himself to eye level with the princess. One of the guards shifted, but Queen Valora made a small gesture, and he stilled. Every living thing has limits, Marcus said. That beast was built to kill, but it needed to breathe. It needed blood flow to its brain. When I wrapped my arm around its neck and squeezed, I cut off both. It didn't matter how strong it was or how many claws it had. Biology doesn't care about advantages. It cares about oxygen. You killed it by understanding how it needed to live. Yes? And the pain? When it was cutting you? I acknowledged it and kept moving. But you could have died. Marcus stood slowly, feeling the ache in every muscle. That's always true. Every day, every fight, every choice. Death is always possible. The question is whether you let that possibility control you. Queen Valora spoke for the first time since granting permission. You made your point, human. My daughter saw what you intended. But I must ask, why does it matter to you whether we remember this lesson? Your species joined the coalition only 30 years ago. You're still considered primitives by most of the great houses. Marcus met her gaze. Because in 2 generations, maybe 3, humanity will forget too. We'll have energy weapons and shields and ships, and we'll stop teaching our children what it means to survive with nothing but will and understanding. We'll become dependent on the technology, and when something breaks or gets taken away, we won't remember how to fight without it.
And you think this is a weakness?
I know it is. I've seen what happens when advanced species encounter something that negates their advantages. They freeze. They panic. They die, because they've forgotten the fundamentals. The princess turned to her mother. Is he right? Queen Valora was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried weight that Marcus felt in his chest. The Battle of Kethrin Crossing. 17 years ago. A coalition fleet of 200 ships encountered a species that could disable all electronic systems within a light-second radius. We lost 197 ships in 4 hours because our crews didn't know how to fight without their instruments. I remember the reports, Marcus said. 3 ships survived. 3 ships crewed entirely by species less than a century into spaceflight. Humans, Vothrine, and Canari, species still young enough to remember how to navigate by stars and fight with manual controls. The Queen's eyes held something Marcus hadn't expected. Respect. You're not primitive, Ambassador Chen. You're practiced at survival. There's a difference. Then you understand why I fight in the arena. I understand why you want us to remember. But demonstration alone won't teach this lesson to a civilization that spent 10,000 years building itself on technology. Marcus smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. I'm not trying to teach the civilization, Your Majesty. I'm trying to teach the future. He looked at the princess. She was still trembling, but her eyes were bright with something that might have been understanding, or might have been determination. Hard to tell at her age. You whispered something, Marcus said. In the observation room when the beast stopped moving. Your mother heard it, but I didn't. What did you say? The princess glanced at her mother, then back at Marcus. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. I said, we've forgotten how to do that. And have you? Yes. Then maybe it's time you learned. Queen Valora stood, and every guard in the room went rigid. You overstep, human. I speak truth, Your Majesty. You brought me here because your daughter needed to see something real, because somewhere inside you know that all this, he gestured at the chamber, at the symbols of power carved into stone, means nothing if the people who inherit it don't understand what survival actually costs. The silence that followed could have been broken with a blade. Then Queen Valora did something Marcus had never seen in any report, any briefing, any intelligence summary about the coalition's ruling families. She laughed. It wasn't a polite laugh or a diplomatic laugh. It was genuine, rising from somewhere deep, and it changed the entire atmosphere in the room. You have courage, she said when the laughter faded. Foolish courage, perhaps, but courage nonetheless. Kaseth, Your Majesty, tomorrow you will begin teaching the princess hand-to-hand combat. No weapons, no armor, nothing but technique and will. You will train her as you would train any warrior, with no concessions for her station. Cassith's face went carefully neutral. Your Majesty, the protocols are mine to change. The queen looked at her daughter. Do you want this? The princess nodded immediately. Yes. It will hurt. You will fail repeatedly. You will question why you're doing it. I understand. No, you don't. Not yet, but you will. Queen Valora turned back to Marcus. And you, Ambassador Chen, once per week you will join these training sessions. You will demonstrate techniques and explain the principles behind them. You will help my daughter understand what you showed her today. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. This was more than he'd hoped for. It would be an honor. Don't thank me yet. If word spreads that the royal family is training in primitive combat, there will be consequences. Political pressure. Mockery from rival houses.
Questions about our judgment.
Let them question, the princess said. Her voice was stronger now. Let them mock. They didn't see what I saw. Marcus looked at this child, this alien princess from a civilization that could move stars, and saw something that gave him hope. Not innocence, not naivety. Understanding. The beginning of it, anyway. One more thing, Queen Valora said. The wound on your leg. You will accept medical treatment before you leave this chamber. That's not a request. Marcus wanted to argue, but he recognized the tone. Some battles you won by knowing when to stop fighting? Yes, Your Majesty. The queen gestured, and a medical attendant appeared from a side chamber Marcus hadn't noticed. As they worked on his leg with instruments that tingled and burned and healed, he watched the princess. She was watching back, studying every movement, every reaction. She would make a good student. Better than good, maybe. The attendant finished, and the wound was gone. Not scarred, not bandaged. Gone, as if it had never existed. The miracle of coalition medicine. But Marcus remembered the pain. Would always remember it. That was the point. He stood, tested the leg, and nodded to the queen. By your leave. Granted. Casseth will escort you out. We'll send word about the training schedule. Marcus bowed, shallow but present. Some gestures mattered. As he turned to leave, the princess spoke one more time. Ambassador Chen, yes? Saw a leader who might remember what her ancestors had forgotten. Saw hope. Any time, princess. The walk back through the arena tunnels felt different. Longer, maybe. Or maybe Marcus was just tired. The adrenaline had worn off hours ago, leaving behind the familiar ache of muscles pushed past their limits. Cassith walked beside him in silence until they reached the tunnel that led to the surface. She's never asked for anything like this before, Cassith said. Princess. She's always been content with her lessons in history and diplomacy and the proper forms of address. And now? Now she's asking to learn something that might actually matter? Cassith's hand had moved away from his sidearm. I'm supposed to protect her. Teaching her to fight seems counterintuitive. Marcus stopped walking and turned to face the guard. You protect her body. What I saw today, what she asked for, that's about protecting her mind, her understanding. There's a difference. Is there? In the end, if she's dead, understanding won't matter. If she's alive but doesn't understand what keeps her that way, she's just waiting to die. Marcus started walking again. Besides, you won't be teaching her to fight. You'll be teaching her to survive. Fighting is just the vocabulary. They emerged into the district's main plaza, where the light from 3 moons cast overlapping shadows across imported marble. The diplomatic quarter never truly slept. Ambassadors and their staff moving between buildings, conducting business that couldn't wait for morning, making deals that would shape policy across dozens of worlds. Marcus had been part of this machine for 3 years, ever since Earth's ambassador had requested a security consultant who understood both human combat doctrine and coalition politics. It had seemed like an impossible job description, but Marcus had learned that impossible was just another word for no one's tried hard enough yet. She knew what would happen. Marcus considered the implications. She wanted her daughter to see it. But why? Why expose the heir to the throne to something so visceral? Because visceral is real. Everything else in the princess's life is mediated through protocol and tradition and layers of people telling her what to think. What I did today, that was real. Immediate. No filters. Cassith stopped at the boundary between the arena district and the diplomatic quarter. This is where I leave you. The training begins tomorrow at dawn. Don't be late. I'm never late. Good. Because if you fail her, if this turns out to be some human ploy to gain influence or position, I will personally ensure you never see another dawn. Marcus met the threat with calm eyes. If I fail her, you won't need to. I'll do it myself. They stood in silence for a moment, measuring each other. Then Cassith nodded and turned back toward the arena. Marcus watched him go, then continued toward the human embassy. Ambassador Sarah Chen, no relation despite the shared surname, was waiting in her office when Marcus arrived. She sat behind a desk made from earth oak, one of the few pieces of home they'd shipped across light years. The rest of the room was Coalition standard, adaptive lighting, walls that could display any environment, furniture that adjusted to the occupant's physiology. You fought in the arena today, she said without preamble. Without weapons. Yes. And then you were summoned to meet with Queen Valora and her daughter. Yes. Marcus, when I hired you as security consultant, I expected you to keep a low profile. Advise on threats, recommend protocols, maybe train the embassy staff. I did not expect you to become a gladiatorial spectacle and start giving private demonstrations to alien royalty. Marcus sat in the chair across from her desk. The opportunity presented itself. The opportunity to do what, exactly? Get yourself killed for entertainment? To teach. Sarah leaned back, her expression shifting from irritation to curiosity. Explain. So he did. He told her about the princess's reaction, about the queen's laugh, about the training sessions that would start tomorrow. He explained his theory about technological dependence and the erosion of fundamental survival skills. He talked about Catherine Crossing and the 3 ships that survived because their crews still knew how to function without computers. When he finished, Sarah was quiet for a long time. You're playing a dangerous game, she said finally. If the rival houses see this as Earth trying to influence the succession, it could destroy everything we've built here. They won't see it that way. How can you be sure? Because I'm not teaching the princess anything that threatens their power. I'm teaching her something they've all forgotten. If anything, the other houses will see it as quaint, a harmless indulgence in primitive practices. And when she becomes queen, when she takes what you've taught her and uses it to reshape coalition policy? Marcus smiled. Then we'll have succeeded beyond our wildest dreams. Sarah shook her head, but she was smiling too. You're either a genius or a fool. I genuinely can't tell which. Why not both? And Marcus? She waited until he was at the door. Don't die in that training ring. I have enough paperwork already. He left her there and made his way to his quarters, a small room with a bed, a desk, and a window that looked out over the city. Below, the lights of 1,000 species homes created a tapestry of color that Earth had never known. Humans were new here, barely a footnote in a history that stretched back millennia. But they were here, and they remembered things the old civilizations had forgotten. Marcus pulled up his personal logs and began recording the day's events. Not the official report, that would be sanitized, diplomatic. This was the real record. The one that mattered. Day 1 of an experiment, he said to the recorder. Question. Can you teach an advanced civilization to value primitive skills? Answer, unknown. But today a princess watched an unarmed human fight, and something changed in her eyes. Something that looked like understanding. He paused, thinking about tomorrow. About the training that would begin. About a small, alien girl who trembled not from fear, but from the weight of revelation. The queen heard her daughter whisper that they'd forgotten how to survive without technology, and instead of dismissing it, instead of reinforcing the narrative of technological superiority, she chose to let her daughter learn. Marcus stopped the recording and sat in silence, watching the lights below. Tomorrow would be interesting. The training began in a chamber beneath the palace, in spaces that hadn't been used for their original purpose in generations. The room was circular, 40 feet across, with walls of polished stone that showed the marks of ancient weapons. Once, this had been where royal guards trained. Now it was storage for ceremonial equipment no one used anymore. Cassith had cleared it out overnight. The floor was swept clean, the walls bare, except for training mats stacked in one corner. The princess stood in the center, wearing simple clothes instead of her usual formal robes. Her mother watched from a raised platform, silent and still. Marcus arrived exactly at dawn. No armor, no weapons, just training clothes and hands that still ached from yesterday's fight. We'll start with falling, he said, addressing the princess directly. She blinked. Falling? You need to learn how to hit the ground without hurting yourself. Most people die from the impact of falling, not from whatever made them fall in the first place. Standard combat doctrine. Learn the basics first. For the next hour, Marcus taught the princess how to roll, how to distribute impact, how to protect her head and neck. She fell dozens of times, each landing progressively better than the last. She didn't complain, didn't ask for breaks. Just stood up and tried again. Good, Marcus said when she executed a clean shoulder roll. Now we'll work on breathing. I know how to breathe. You know how to breathe for living. I'm going to teach you how to breathe for fighting. There's a difference. It showed her how to pull air deep into her lungs, how to exhale on exertion, how to control her breathing even when panicked. Basic techniques, but fundamental. Everything else would build on this foundation. The queen watched it all without comment, just observed, absorbing every detail. After 2 hours, Marcus called a halt. That's enough for today. Your body needs time to adapt. The princess was breathing hard, sweat darkening her simple tunic. Tomorrow we'll add movement. Footwork. How to close distance, how to create it, and then fighting. But if I let you fight before you know how to fall and breathe and move, you'll just learn bad habits. We're building from the ground up. She nodded, and Marcus saw something in her face that reminded him of young soldiers back on Earth. That determination that came from understanding the stakes. The queen descended from her platform, moving with the grace that came from generations of breeding. Well done, daughter. Kaseth escorted her to the baths. When they were alone, Queen Valora turned to Marcus.
You were gentle with her.
She's learning. Being brutal won't help her retain the lessons. And when will you stop being gentle? When she's ready for it not to be gentle anymore. The queen walked to the training mats, running one elegant hand across their surface. I watched my great-grandmother's historical recordings recently. She led armies in the Catherine Wars, back when our people still remembered how to fight without relying on technology. There's footage of her in hand-to-hand combat with a Vothrine champion. She was magnificent. What happened to that tradition? We won, decisively. And with victory came comfort, and with comfort came dependence on the systems that made victory easy. She looked at Marcus. We stopped teaching our children to suffer because we believed we'd built a world where suffering was unnecessary. There's no such world. I'm beginning to remember that. She moved toward the exit, then paused. The whisper. When you asked my daughter what she said, she told you we'd forgotten how to fight without technology. But that wasn't all she said. Marcus waited. She also said we're going to die if we don't remember. 9 years old, and she understood what took me decades to see. The queen's voice carried something Marcus couldn't quite identify. Pride, maybe, or fear, or both. Teach her well, Ambassador Chen. The future may depend on it. She left, and Marcus stood alone in the training chamber. The future may depend on it. No pressure. He looked at his hands, at the calluses and scars that told the story of a lifetime spent learning how to survive. Then he looked at the training mats, at the ancient marks on the walls. Tomorrow they would work on footwork. Next week, basic strikes. In a month, if she progressed well, he'd start teaching her about leverage and joint locks and all the ways a smaller fighter could defeat a larger one. But underneath it all, he'd be teaching her the real lesson, the one that mattered more than any technique. He'd be teaching her that survival was a choice you made every day, that it required understanding, discipline, and the willingness to endure pain for a purpose greater than yourself. He'd be teaching her to remember what her civilization had forgotten. And maybe, just maybe, that memory would spread, from one princess, to one kingdom, to one civilization. Maybe it would take root and grow until the whole coalition remembered that technology was a tool, not a crutch, that real power came from understanding the fundamentals. It was a long shot, an impossible dream. But Marcus had learned long ago that impossible just meant no, one had tried hard enough yet. He picked up one of the training mats and began setting up for tomorrow's lesson. The work had only just begun. 6 months passed in a rhythm of training and progress. The Princess Ziria, as she'd insisted Marcus call her during their sessions, learned faster than anyone had expected. She mastered falling, breathing, movement, began to understand leverage and timing, started to see the patterns that underlay all combat. But more importantly, she started to think differently. Marcus noticed it first during a diplomatic function. The Catherani ambassador had been pressuring Queen Valora about trade agreements, using the implicit threat of military action to force concessions. Standard power politics, the kind that happened every day in the coalition. Ziria had been present, as she often was now, learning statecraft alongside combat. And when the ambassador made his veiled threat, Marcus saw her eyes narrow, saw her evaluate the ambassador's stance, his positioning, the way he held himself. She was reading him like an opponent in the training ring. "Ambassador," she'd said, her voice clear despite her youth. "You speak of military strength, but I notice you stand with your weight on your back foot. Defensive posturing. Which suggests your fleet isn't as prepared as you want us to believe." The chamber had gone silent. 9-year-olds didn't speak like that to ambassadors. 9-year-old princesses especially didn't call out diplomatic bluffs. But Ziria had, and she'd been right. The Kethrani had withdrawn their pressure, and the trade agreement went through on favorable terms. Afterward, in the training chamber, Marcus had asked her about it. "You taught me to read body language," she'd said simply. "To look for tells." Combat doesn't stop being combat just because you're wearing formal robes instead of training clothes. Now 6 months in, they were working on something more advanced. Grappling, the art of controlling an opponent through position and leverage. "Your strength doesn't matter if I control your center of gravity," Marcus explained, demonstrating on Cassith. The guard was twice Marcus's size, but when Marcus shifted his weight correctly, Cassith went down like a falling tree. Ziria watched, absorbed every detail, then tried it herself. She failed the first time. And the second. By the 10th attempt, she was starting to understand the principle. "It's like diplomacy," she said suddenly. Marcus and Cassith exchanged glances. "Explain," Marcus said. "In negotiations, if you control the framework, the assumptions everyone agrees to, then it doesn't matter if the other side has more ships or more credits. You've already determined the outcome by controlling how everyone thinks about the problem." She demonstrated again, this time succeeding in off-balancing Cassith. Same principle. Control the center, control the outcome. This was what he'd hoped for. The ability to see connections across contexts. To understand that the lessons of combat applied far beyond the training ring. Good. Now show me against multiple opponents. 2 more guards entered the chamber. Volunteers from the Royal Guard who'd been training alongside Ziria. They were larger, stronger, more experienced. But Marcus had taught Ziria how to move, how to position herself so she only faced one at a time, how to use one opponent's momentum against another. She didn't win. Not yet. Moved with purpose, created angles, made them work against each other. When they finally pinned her, she'd lasted longer than most trained soldiers would have. "Better," Marcus said. "What did you learn?" Ziria stood, breathing hard. "That numbers aren't as important as position. And that even when you lose, how you lose matters." "Why does it matter?" "Because losing while maintaining your principles teaches you more than winning by abandoning them." Marcus looked at Queen Valora, who'd been watching from her usual platform. The Queen's expression was unreadable, but something in her posture suggested approval. The training session ended, and as Ziria left with her guards, Queen Valora descended to the training floor. "The other houses have noticed," she said without preamble. "They're calling it an eccentricity, a primitive affectation. But they're watching. Some are starting their own programs, teaching their heirs hand-to-hand combat, calling it traditional skills restoration." The Queen's tone suggested amusement. "You've started a trend." "Good. That means the message is spreading. Or it means they're preparing for something." She walked to where Marcus stood. "There are rumors. Whispers about a new threat in the outer territories. Something that can disable technology. Just like Kethryn Crossing. Confirmed? Not yet. But 3 ships have gone dark in the Helios sector. All of them disappeared after reporting technical difficulties. What does intelligence say? Intelligence says it's probably nothing. Equipment failure, navigation errors, the usual explanations. Queen Valora met his eyes. But my daughter whispers that we're not ready if it's something more. And I'm starting to believe her." They stood in silence, the weight of implication heavy between them. "If it's real," Marcus said slowly, "if there's something out there that can negate our technological advantages, the Coalition will need people who remember how to fight without them." "Yes." "How long do we have? To panic? Already too late." The Queen gestured at the training equipment. "This is no longer about teaching my daughter character or discipline or traditional values. This has become preparation for a war we haven't admitted we're fighting yet." Marcus looked at the ancient marks on the walls. Made by weapons no one used anymore, thought about civilizations that had forgotten how to survive and paid the price. "Then we need to accelerate the program. Not just Ziria. We need to train a cadre of instructors who can spread these skills throughout the Royal Guard, eventually throughout the Coalition. 20 candidates from the Guard, 5 from other houses who've requested training, all sworn to secrecy about the true purpose. And the true purpose is survival. When the systems fail and the technology goes dark and all that's left is will and understanding, we'll be the ones who remember how to keep fighting. Marcus nodded slowly. I'll need more time with Ziria. Real training, not the gentle introduction she's been receiving. How much harder? Hard enough that she'll understand what real combat feels like. Hard enough that she won't freeze when the moment comes. He met the Queen's gaze. Hard enough that she might get hurt. The Queen was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of every decision a parent made when they knew safety was an illusion. Do it. But if you damage her spirit or her confidence, I will end you. Personally. Understood. One more thing. The Queen pulled a data tablet from her robes. This came through intelligence channels this morning. Encoded transmission from the outer territories. Someone out there is trying to reach us. Marcus took the tablet and read the message. It was fragmentary, broken by static and interference, but the core was clear enough. Disable tech. Hand combat only advantage. Prepare. The transmission cut off there. Could be a hoax, Marcus said. Could be, but I don't think it is. Queen Valora turned toward the exit. Tomorrow we train for real. No more gentle lessons. Show my daughter what war actually looks like. She left, and Marcus stood alone with the tablet. Stared at the fragmentary message and thought about all the ways civilization could fall. All the confidence they'd built in their technology, their weapons, their ability to control the universe through superior force. And he thought about one 9-year-old princess who'd learned to read body language and control center of gravity and see the connections between combat and diplomacy. She wasn't ready. Not yet. But she would be. She had to be. Marcus set down the tablet and began preparing the training equipment for tomorrow. This time they wouldn't use the practice mats. They'd use the stone floor. Ziria needed to feel what real impact was like. Needed to understand that training bruises healed, but battlefield mistakes didn't. It would be cruel. It would hurt. She would probably hate him for it. But when the moment came, when the technology failed and only fundamental skills remained, she would survive. And survival was all that mattered. The next morning, Ziria arrived to find the training chamber transformed. The mats were gone. The floor was bare stone. Marcus stood in the center, and beside him stood 6 guards in full combat gear. Today is different, Marcus said. Today you learn what happens when everything goes wrong at once. Ziria looked at her mother, who sat on her platform with an expression of stone. No help there.
What do you mean?
Ziria asked. I mean, today we simulate a real combat scenario. Technology fails.
Your guards are down. You're alone.
And you have to survive. He gestured at the 6 guards. They won't hurt you permanently. But they won't let you win easily either. 6 against 1? Welcome to war, princess. It's never fair. What followed was the hardest 90 seconds of Ziria's life. She used everything Marcus had taught her. Footwork, positioning, leverage, breathing. She kept moving, refused to let them surround her completely, made them get in each other's way. But in the end, 6 trained guards overwhelmed one 9-year-old girl. They pinned her to the stone floor, and Marcus called the exercise. Ziria was crying when they let her up. Not from pain, though there was pain, but from frustration, from the understanding that she'd failed. Again, and again, and again. By the 5th round, Ziria wasn't crying anymore. She was learning. Started to see the patterns, the ways the guards coordinated, found the weak points in their formation. On the 8th round, she managed to disable 1 guard before the others got her. On the 12th, she disabled 2. By the time Marcus called a halt, 3 hours had passed. Ziria was covered in bruises, exhausted beyond anything she'd experienced before. But her eyes were clear, focused. What did you learn? Marcus asked. Ziria thought for a long moment. That losing isn't the same as being defeated. That even when you can't win, you can still fight. That every moment you survive is another chance to adapt. Marcus looked at Queen Valora, who'd watched the entire session without flinching. The Queen nodded once. Approval. Good, Marcus said to Ziria. Because tomorrow, we do it again. And the day after. And every day. Until you can survive against impossible odds without breaking. Ziria met his eyes, and Marcus saw something new there. Not innocence lost. She was too young to have had much innocence about the universe. But understanding gained. The knowledge that real strength came from continuing even when every instinct screamed to surrender. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For not letting me stay soft." She looked at her hands, at the new bruises forming. "For showing me what I need to become." And Marcus realized that this moment, this exact instant, was why he'd fought in the arena 6 months ago, why he'd let a war beast tear open his leg rather than quit, why he'd accepted the invitation to train a princess in skills her civilization had forgotten, because somewhere in the future, this girl would face a choice. Stand or fall, fight or surrender. Remember or forget. And when that moment came, she would choose to stand. Choose to fight. Choose to remember. The whisper her mother had heard 6 months ago, "We're going to die if we don't remember," had become a promise. They would remember.
And they would survive.